Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's your boy, Diddy, man. And today we talking about the game.
I am the game!
Nah, we ain't talking about that game. We talking about the game from Compton, California. What we doing today? We giving game its R.O.S.E grade. What's a R.O.S.E grade, you may ask? It's basically an overall grade of an artist throughout their entire career. It's a combination of different stats that I kind of put together, and I've been working on it over the course of the last couple of years to come up with some type of system that tracks how good artists were across their generation, that we could kind of track to see where artists landed across the diaspora of hip hop. So with that said, let's go over some of the stats and let's give game his current R.O.S.E grade. First things first, man, I want to start off with game's pen game. For pen game, I use a couple of different attributes to compile an overall score, including bars, consistency, storytelling, flow, complexity, and a couple other things as well to consider. First, I want to go over game's two biggest stats here that I think contribute to how good he was as an MC. Number one, consistency. Almost nobody from that era put out as much music as the game, especially if you consider all his mixtapes. He put out hella albums, he guest appearance on a whole bunch of projects. He has soundtracks, joint projects, compilations, the whole 9 yards. He was super active. You probably couldn't even go a couple of months without hearing game on something. So for that, he got a 9. And one of Game's other strongest points, which is one of the strongest points amongst almost everybody from his class, is his storytelling ability. When you think of Game and you think of some of his stories, he's kind of like one of the first to innovate, making records, talking about his children in a unique way where he's talking about their births. He did it for both of his sons. He did it for his daughter, California Dream. And aside from that, Game takes his storytelling really seriously, and he does a really good job of emphasizing it. You're able to visualize everything that he's saying. Sometimes he has a tendency to lose track of the topic, but overall, I think he is one of the strongest storytellers of his class. For that, he got a 9. The number one stat here that pretty much put a dent in his overall pen game score was his complexity. And what I'm using for complexity is things like double entendres, triple entendres, things like that, mastery of different techniques and things that make your rhyme flow and style more complex than the next person. When you compare Game to some of the people in his class and in his generation, it's just above average. It's not bad, it's not amazing, it's not anything that's gonna blow you away, but he has enough of a unique voice. He really hampers on to techniques and mimicking a lot of the artists that he grew up listening to. So he keeps you engaged, but as you listen and you try to break down some of the lyrics, you realize that there's not a lot of complexity to him. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but because Game has some other attributes that he's stronger in. So for this, he got a 6. Overall, Game got an 8 for his pen game. I think he's a capable MC. He's one of the best of his generation. He has a strong pen. A lot of people don't want to come at him, especially because he's so relentless and he just won't let up. For albums, Game has 9 official solo albums. He has a bunch of mixtapes. He has a bunch of compilations and things like that. Like I mentioned, I felt like that Game's strongest contribution to hip hop is his albums, because he does a good job of making sure his albums are really concise. His mixtape overall are pretty hit or miss. There's some really good gems on things like Red Light and Perp and Patron, and he's got some really dope records on there. But overall, I felt like adding in his mixtapes here would kind of hurt his album ranking, so I just left them out and I just went with just his albums. Game has one classic album, that is the documentary. And outside of the documentary, he has 2 really strong albums that are just as good as that, not necessarily classics, and that's The Doctor's Advocate and The Red Room. Other than that, he has some really good projects, and then he has a couple projects that are a little bit more of a too many records on this project, which kind of prevent it from being good. That's not to say Game doesn't have any other standout projects. It's just that I feel like at some point he gets a little overzealous with how many records that he puts on these projects, especially the documentary 2, which I think is one of his best bodies of work, but it's kind of bogged down by how many records is on the project. You can actually get probably a classic album if you cut that down to 13, 14 tracks. Even if you try to cut it down to 18, which is similar to match to the documentary length. Averaging all Game's album scores out, you end up with a 7.4, which I don't think is bad overall, considering that you got to consider all of the projects. You can't just consider the stuff that you like. 7.4 for the albums, which I think is really good. One of the other key stats that I wanted to consider was features, and I think Game is one of those rappers that don't really pull the level of attention for a feature that some other artists from his generation do. When you think of some of Game's biggest features, you're thinking of songs he has with M, songs he has with 50, songs he has with The Game, with Joe Budden. He has songs with pretty much everybody in the industry. Nipsey, Kendrick Lamar. Now, some of the things you walk away with is that Game pretty much gets outclassed a lot of the time on guest records. So for this, I gave him a 6. When it comes to diversity, I pretty much consider diversity and versatility in the same pile, and I went with a ratio of 80-20. How often do you try different things? And when you try those different things, are you mastering them? Are you actually doing a really dope thing with them? Are you actually always trying to grow as an MC? Do you have different type of records on your projects? Do every project sound exactly the same? And for this, Game got an 8. I think Game is one of the most versatile artists there are. He's pretty much done almost everything you could think of. There are some songs and some things that he's done that's kind of cringy, but overall, I still feel like you end up on a more positive note than anything. Hitmakers and anthems. So for this, man, Game is a certified hitmaker. However, the way I calculated this, I calculated and crossed their entire career, not just at the peaks of their careers. So for this, I got Game at an 8, which is actually really good. Game is a certified hitmaker. He's got anthems. He has songs that come on and everybody knows the words to. So the thing that I kind of dinged him here for, and this is kind of with the conversations that I had with a lot of the people I was consulting with when I was coming up with these scores, is when you think of these records that are anthems, they come on, everybody knows the words. Are you thinking of Game, or are you thinking of the person that he has on the record with him? And that's not to say the Game doesn't have any anthems without anybody on them. I feel like It's Okay One Blood is one of those type of records. I feel like Red Nation is close to an anthem. If not, it's a big enough record, especially because the person that took out Osama bin Laden talks about how he listened to this record when he did it. But overall, I feel like an 8 is a great score for him. Game's impact on hip hop, I gave him an 8 for this, and most of his impact, in my opinion, comes from California. Comes to his impact on the state of California. He's pretty much heavily responsible for the blow up of Nipsey Hussle, Kendrick Lamar, most of the artists from TDE. He's kind of like he also, on top of that, he revived West Coast hip hop. At that point in time when Game came out, West Coast hip hop wasn't really in a good space as far as visibility goes. They had MCs that were still killing it, but they just weren't commercially visible per se. And Game came in, kind of took the mantle from Snoop, ran with it, and then he definitely passed the baton. He took a lot of younger guys on tour with him, and he helped get their foot in the door. So for that, for Game's impact, I give him an 8. For Aura, this is the trickiest stat that I had put together, because as I was consulting people about their thoughts on Game's it factor, his ability just to have people interested in everything that he's doing outside of music, it always comes back to this thing where it's not necessarily positive. Like the media that's surrounding him lately, right? Everything that people have been talking about is not necessarily in a positive light. It's because he's saying things, he's hinting that he's going to expose people, and then people are questioning why he chose to do this or do that. It's not necessarily in a glowing fashion like how people would say Tupac. And I'm not trying to compare Game to Tupac. I'm just using Tupac as an example because Tupac is somebody that's aura was massive. People were interested in everything he was doing, whether it was rapping, people wanted to see him act, people wanted to just like hear him speak. And Game doesn't necessarily have that type of vibe and push to him. So for Game's aura, he ended up with a 6. So after I throw all of these numbers inside of my secret recipe blender, Game comes out to a 74 for his R.O.S.E rating. 74 isn't bad, especially when you guys start seeing some of these other videos and seeing what numbers these other artists land at. I feel like Game is the above average MC that can pretty much do pretty much anything. He's been successful. He's had time where he's not necessarily in the spotlight, and he's still managed to make himself relevant. He can still do tours, sell out the shows. His verses, he showed how popular his songs are, even though a lot of his songs don't necessarily fit that venue style, because a lot of his styles, Game's like a West Coast rapper that had a heavy East Coast, New York style inspiration, especially a lot of the production he would pick. Game is still important to the overall legacy of hip hop. 74 overall for Game, man. Let me know how you guys feel about that. What do you guys think is wrong? What do you guys think is right? What would you change? Do you guys feel like Game doesn't get enough credit for his albums, his pen? Do y'all feel like Game's aura is a lot bigger than I expected it to be? Go ahead and let me know in the comments down below, man. We can have this be some type of community engagement thing. And Game is still active, so this isn't necessarily a final grade. This is just where he's at this point. Hopefully his next album is a classic and we can bump that album rating up, and maybe he'll challenge himself a little bit more on the mic and just show how complex he can be. Looking forward to that. Let me know who you guys want to see next, but the next video straight up is Lil Wayne. Be on the lookout for that. Love you guys. Peace.